welcome to the second incredibly boring teaching session on kind of annual leave, pay slips, tax, tedious stuff like that. That in general, I found people don't know so much about, mainly because it's very boring. But there's lots of minutiae, and hopefully going through some of the stuff today will end up saving you quite a bit of time and potentially quite a bit of money as well. Just a quick declaration of interest, I'm also the lesson full-time officer for South Thames on the BMA. So if you have things that you want to raise from the South Thames region or around London in general, please do let me know and I can kind of take that forwards from a BMA point of view. But this is not a BMA endorsed teaching session, this is just me. As I mentioned before, I'd like it to be a little bit interactive. There's a lot of information to give you, but please do post questions or just unmute yourself and ask questions as we go along. Some of the concepts are more complicated than others, so it's always useful for you to clarify if you're not sure. So let us get going. Just hide that. There we go. Okay, so we are going to talk about leave first of all. So that's going to be a mix of annual leave, study leave, bank holidays, things like that. And clear up some of the confusions that people often have. We're going to talk about pay and how to understand your pay slips and why that is so important. And then if you've got any energy left, we'll talk a little bit about tax too, which will save you loads of money if you haven't already done some important things. So first of all, let's talk about leave. So to get things going, and I would like, my chat's just disappeared, but I would like you to put something in here. I'm going to start with a little bit of a quiz to get your brains going. So this is a real life example from earlier this year. Dom is a 80% less than full-time trainee. He's starting a 6-monthly rotation and his induction period is the 1st to the 3rd of March. This is the induction period rota. These are the bank holidays and the shifts. So long day, end of the night, short day. I'd like you all to just have a quick think how you would go about working out how many days of leave this fictional person would get. If you know the answer, if it's really obvious to you every rotation, then great, you can like mute me and go get a cup of tea for the next 10 minutes. But if you've got any doubts, if you're not 100% sure, then this next section is going to teach you all about how to manage all of this. Just before I get going, everyone has disappeared and I can't get the interface back up. Can someone just unmute themselves and say yes if they can still hear me and see me?
Yep.
Okay, cool, great. I can't see the chat, so people are going to have to read it out to me. I can't seem to get it to come back up either. But does anyone know for sure?
Nope.
Okay, cool. Let's go through it. So basics first. Obviously, annual leave, everyone is entitled to a set amount. For the first 5 years you're employed, you get 27 days per year. After 5 years, you get 32 days a year. No one will do this automatically for you. So if you hit your 5 years of NHS service, make sure picking up those extra days. It's obviously pro rata if you're less than full time. It is nice and basic. So gets a little bit more complicated when we start thinking about bank holiday entitlement. This is a point of huge confusion, and most people I've chatted to can have varying ways that they do it. I'm going to go through a really simple way that is foolproof. And the other reason this is important is your rota coordinator often, not always, but often won't do this calculation for you as well. So you need to be in control. So calculating your total leave allowance, including bank holidays. First of all, regardless of whether you're working them or not, regardless of whether you're less than full time or not, just count up all the bank holidays that you're going to have in that rotation. Then add them raw, so the full number, to your full-time annual leave allowance. So that's half of 27 if it's a 6-month rotation, half of 32, whatever. And then if you're less than full-time, multiply this number by your less than full-time percentage. So, through a quick worked example, if you are a 60% less than full-time ST1, and there are, well, in this rotation, there are 3 bank holidays, so Christmas, Boxing Day, New Year's Day. So you get 3 bank holidays, add them to half of your 27 annual leave days, so 13.5, and that gets you your full-time allowance for that rotation. And then if you're less than full-time, you multiply it by a percentage. So 10 days. And just a kind of a point of clarification, you round up to the nearest half day. So even if you're like 9.1 days, you get 9.5 days of annual leave. So now you have to work out what you're actually going to do with those bank holidays, depending on whether you're working on them or not. So you've got your total number, and then you need to apply the bank holidays. So first of all, look through, and if you are rostered to work on a bank holiday day, but because it's a leave-friendly day or whatever, you don't work it, so you get it off because it's a bank holiday, you deduct 1 day from total leave allowance. The best way to think of it is basically enforced annual leave. You have to take a day of annual leave on that day. If you are not rostered to work on that day for any reason, whether it's because it's a 0 day or a non-working day, whatever reason, you do not deduct a day of leave. And if you're working any number of hours that day, so if you're finishing a night shift or starting a night shift or anything like that, you don't deduct a day of annual leave. I hope that makes sense. Any quick questions on bank holidays before I move on to the next section? It's really disconcerting.
How can you tell if it's a non-working? Sorry. How can you tell if it's a non-working day as opposed to you're just not rostered to work because it's bank holiday?
Yeah, really good question. So when you start a job, you should get something called a generic or a personalized work schedule, which will have all of the days that you're down to work, and that would not include any bank holiday days off. So if you're not down to work on your work schedule when you get it, that is a day off. And if you are down to work, then you're down to work. But that work schedule shouldn't take into account bank holiday days, so you need to look at that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Cool. So let's talk about study leave. You're entitled to. I'm going to get a little bit soapboxy about taking study leave, and then we'll go through some of the practicalities. So, as I'm sure you all know, you as paediatric trainees are entitled to 30 days of study leave per year. If you're less than full-time, you get a pro rata amount. You are trainees. You are meant to be in training. You're meant to use this. I know that's often a little bit tricky. There's loads of reasons, both externally and within ourselves, why we don't always take all of our annual leave. And these are, various quotes that I've said or I've heard, including from kind of various of my educational supervisors saying, "Oh, you're not really meant to take all of your study leave." This is just not true. It's really important that you acknowledge that that study leave is there for you to take. Think about the fact that you're in a really highly competitive training program, you've worked really hard to get here, and you are all adult learners. You need to take responsibility for your education throughout the year, and be educated for your patients when you come out the other side of it. There are ways to kind of alleviate some of that guilt or that difficulty that we all have in taking all of our study leave. So I think it really starts with everybody across London, across your firm, knowing what your rights are, and all of you going in with an attitude of we are all as a team going to take our study leave, and supporting all of your colleagues to do the same, making sure that everyone has access to it. Other things that you can do that I found really helpful in certain rotations is kind of flagging up interesting courses to everybody in your rotation. And if you go on a really interesting course not everyone can go on, maybe feeding some of the useful learning points back to your department and kind of make it a group learning exercise. During COVID, when some people were working from home, they just summarized every one of the LFP sessions, every one of the RSM days for everybody, and it was really invaluable. So let's talk a little bit about practicality. Oh no, yeah, there's an interesting thing about people saying, well, 30 days is so much study leave. Accommodate all of the 8 bank holidays in a year and 30 days of study leave. They should be designed specifically for that, for you to have as many, up to 70 days in a year for you to take. And there's a line from the contract that really alludes to that. It says the work schedule must be designed to facilitate access to all of your leave and your appropriate training. So there needs to be time in the rota for you to take all of this stuff. So some practicalities, and I'm sure most of you will know all of this. Study leave is divided into 3 categories. There's mandatory stuff, so that covers your life support courses, your safeguarding, the RSM days, and the regional London School of Paediatrics teaching days. This is stuff that you really should be taking on your rotations. It's stuff that you are very much expected to take to meet the requirements of the curriculum. Next is the massive list of optional things, which I'll go through very quickly. This is just things that relate to the curriculum. They don't expect everyone to do everything, but you should be accessing lots of this stuff. And then there's the aspirational stuff, and this is literally anything else that you can sell as being relevant to you and your training. And in that, you get 1 international conference that you're given study leave for during your training as well. There is also kind of this separate section called professional leave, which is used for mainly for us interviews and things like that. This doesn't count as annual leave and it doesn't count as study leave. So if you have interviews and things that you need to take for professional reasons, this is a whole separate issue. So hopefully everyone has seen this beautiful table. It's on the Health Education England website. There's a link to this and lots of other stuff at the end of this teaching. But this is the Bible of what you can and can't take, and it changes all the time. So you'll come back to it 6 months later and it will have changed. And often educational supervisors and people who think that they know this inside out need to kind of keep going back and checking it. As you can see, you've got some of the mandatory stuff in green, and then a bunch of loads of optional stuff as well. But just have a look at that to see what you are expected to be taking study leave for during your training. Then when it comes on to requesting study leave, when it comes to mandatory and optional stuff, the most important thing is to look at the code on the table that I just showed you. If it has a code, if you can shoehorn your study leave request into having one of these codes, it makes life really easy. And then it's basically a case of checking what your local policy is. That usually involves discussing with your rota coordinator, filling in forms, etc. Aspirational is a little bit more involved, and there is a kind of a national way of doing it. So first of all, you need to discuss it with your educational supervisor, explain why it's really important, then discuss it with your training program director. And if they both agree, they will send an email to the head of school, and then you get issued an approval number, which is basically one of these codes. And then you can go to your postgrad department and say, here is my code, please give me the leave, please give me the funding. So we've all had difficulty accessing study leave, and I'm going to come on to some of the kind of more rotary issues later. But again, just to quote the contracts, all requests for study leave really need to be properly considered by the employer. You might not be able to access everything, you might not always get everything that you want, but they shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. You really should be having a discussion about everything that you want to request. Obviously, granting study leave needs to maintain a safe service, so if you're super strapped for staff, it's going to be a little bit harder to access. In practice, you are likely going to yourself try and facilitate swapping nights and long days, etc. But if you are on a leave-friendly day, or if you're on a day off, there's really no legitimate reason why you should be being denied study leave on these days. You can make life a little bit easier for your department. Remember to get your study leave requests in early. Usually they need to be in within 6 weeks. Ideally, just it's worth at the start of every rotation looking through the things that you want to do and getting those requests in as quickly as possible. If people are having difficulty accessing study leave for whatever reason, please do engage with the BMA, your Guardian for Safe Working, things like that, to try and facilitate and talk to each other if you're having difficulty as well. So study leave expenses. For the mandatory and optional courses, at the moment, it's pretty much unlimited. You can take as many of these courses as you want and you will be funded for everything, which is just incredible. Aspirational courses, there's a discretionary £1,000 limit per course. Seems like a ridiculous amount, but remember, included in that aspirational things are like diplomas. So if you do a diploma that costs you £2,000, you can get £1,000 back from the course. For international courses, you get either the course fee or the travel and accommodation, whichever one is cheaper. So they will be a little bit expensive for you personally, but it's still a pretty good deal. And then things that often get forgotten is travel. So all travel will be reimbursed in full. And if you drive, you get 28p per mile. So that's a lot more than the cost of petrol, although maybe not kind of the last couple of weeks. But this is to cover the fact that you're using your own car and there's loads of wear and tear and things like that. So you get quite a lot back if you drive. And then accommodation, you get loads for staying in a nice hotel. So remember, you are highly skilled, highly respected professionals going on to do really important courses. You don't need to scrimp and save and stay in like a travel lodge. You can book a nice hotel. If you just think about any of your friends or people that you know who work for kind of big corporations, they get put up in ridiculous places. So do access and use that accommodation budget as well. Just a quick note, all of this funding is only provided in a health education funded post. So in practice, that's if you are in a training post. If you're on an outer program or you're a trust grade, you need to look at your local kind of funding policy, but it will be significantly less than this. So this is only if you're in a training post. Any questions about study leave before we move on to the next section?
Sorry, Don, where was that big table of courses that you put? Where do I find that table?
So it's buried in the depths of the Health Education England website, but at the end of this teaching session, I've got a tiny URL link to it. So just take a note of it, and it will take you straight through. But if you want to look for it, basically search for Health Education England study leave. There'll be a little drop-downy thing. You click on the study leave for trainees, and then there'll be a section with all the different specialties, and you click on the pediatrics one, and then it will bring you up the table. The link is broken like 20% of the time, so if you goes error not found, just come back in a bit. But it's on the Health Education website.
Thank you.
So let's talk about lieu days, another slightly contentious point, but it shouldn't be. So lieu days are time back for any shift you work which you weren't previously meant to be working for. This includes loads of stuff, namely induction days, study leave, and exams and interviews. Remember, interviews are that professional leave, but you still get time off if you take one on an off day. You also get it back for any mandatory training that you've completed at the start of a job done in your own time. Most places are pretty good at giving days in lieu back for that as standard. Anything you exception report, you will generate time back in lieu for. And I put sick days in brackets. Technically, if you take a sick day on a day of leave, you can claim back time in lieu for. I leave that up to you guys. But the other stuff is really important. Okay, difficulties. I know we've all kind of had difficulties getting time back in lieu, and I know that right now there are a few trusts around London that are actively saying, well, we won't give you time back in lieu unless it's a mandatory course. This is just categorically untrue, and the contract is very, very clear, and it says where study leave is approved, you must be given time off in lieu or payment if you prefer, but this is a must thing. It's not an optional thing. If you are in one of those unfortunate trusts where you're being told that this isn't the case, or you can only have time off in lieu for mandatory things, or you only get 3 days off in lieu, etc., this is not acceptable and it needs to be raised. So things you can do about it. First of all, stick together as a group of trainees. It's awful being that one trainee that tries to stand up for everybody and says, no, we must be getting time off in lieu, and you end up looking a bit like an asshole. But if everyone knows their rights and kind of works together to say this is not acceptable, it'll be better for everyone. Don't accept a situation which is contractual. It's not fair on everyone you work with, it's not fair on the people that come after you, and you can exception report. That is the tool you have if you're in one of these situations. So if you have a study leave request approved because it's, you know, NLS or it's an optional thing that you've got the study leave approved for, and they've said, oh, it's a day off, you don't get the time off, exception report it. Then it will go to the Guardian, and the Guardian of Safe Working will absolutely come and back you up and say they must be given time off in lieu. And if you don't want to take the time, because some people say, you know, the department's really strapped, we don't have enough time off, you can take payments. And if anyone's interested, there's a formula for how much money you get per day of working. but don't just ignore it. So before we go on to talk about pay, any last questions about any of the leave related stuff at all? Any problems that people are having in their own hospitals?
Dom, does the study leave lieu days include weekends? So if you do like there's lots of courses that only run on the weekend, like GIC being one of them. Are you supposed to get time off for that?
100% yes, because a weekend, well, unless you're meant to be working, but yeah, a weekend is a non-working day just like any other day. So if you take a day of study leave on a Saturday, you absolutely get a day of lieu back for it.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Any other questions? Anyone want to name and shame any trusts? Cool. Let's talk about pay. Okay. Take a quick pause and have a look at this pay slip. I think I've anonymized everything that needs to be anonymized. It's obviously mine, but please don't like steal my identity or anything. Just have a quick look at it and have a think if you understand all of the bits. In particular, all of the stuff on the left-hand side. And if there are any people who are like, yes, I understand all of this, this pay slip is incorrect. I have been paid incorrectly here. And I'd love it to see if anyone can find out or why. So just have a quick moment to look and then we'll move on. Okay, so let's go through all of this stuff. Why can't you just be happy with what you're given? Surely payroll just gets it right and it's sort of fine. Sadly, no. I would kind of hedge my bets and say like 2/3 of you on this call are being paid incorrectly right now. It's ridiculous how many payroll errors are happening all of the time. The last 4 rotations I've moved through, I've been paid incorrectly on every single one of them. And in most situations, everyone else has been paid incorrectly too, for the same reason. And it has a massive range from a financial point of view. So it ranges from about £1,000 per year up to my current job, where I was underpaid by £25,000 per year. And the person who was in post 6 months prior to me hadn't noticed. So they got a back payment of like, yeah, £12,500. So this does happen. Common errors. So the most common things, but there's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff that can happen. Not being paid one of the many different components that come up, which I'm going to go through individually in a bit. One of the many components being calculated incorrectly. Being charged unused add-ons like mess fees and stuff. Some people use the mess, but a lot of places you just get automatically put onto it. And as paediatricians, we often never even see the mess. So just make sure you're not missing out on, 120 quid a year over the course of your 10 years of training, because it does that up. And then being refunded incorrectly for things like study leave, etc., and plain old just not being paid, because that happens. Again, just to give you a little bit of context, literally yesterday, another colleague asked me to check their pay and found out that they're being underpaid by £2,000 over the last 6 months. It's so common. So just a little bit of background as to why I think we need to be talking more about our pay. I'm sure a lot of you remember the kind of 2016 junior doctor strikes, which weren't about pay, but since then our pay has just been persistently and consistently eroded. This year, this is me getting all BMAE on you. This year, everyone in the NHS got a 3% uplift, which is still worse than inflation, and everyone is very pissed off about it. Junior doctors missed out on that because previously we'd negotiated a 2% uplift. And so they said, yeah, fine, you're just going to get that. Over the last few years, we've probably had about 15% real terms pay cuts. So our pay is being aggressively eroded. And I'm not going to talk about that now, but just if we're going to get upset and annoyed at that level of pay erosion, the bare minimum we can do is stand up for what pay we are meant to be getting right now and making sure that we're being paid correctly on the current terms and conditions. So I would recommend really getting involved in your pay, checking it regularly, making sure you're being paid correctly, and discussing it openly with your colleagues as well. So let's have a little look at the salary. It's divided into lots of different bits. Some are easy to work out, some are more complicated. You get your basic salary, There's the additional hours rate, which is the additional rostered hours there. There's a weekend frequency allowance, there's the night duty allowance, and there's a smorgasbord of like these pay premia, which are a bunch of extra little add-ons if you fulfill certain criteria. And then on the left-hand side here, you also get your study leave reimbursements and anything like that. So I'm going to go through each of them, but please feel free to ask questions as we go. So basic pay, nice and simple. If everyone has seen one of these tables, there is a circular released every year which lays out all of the pay, but it changes all the time. So you need to kind of be aware of how these things are slowly fluxing. But basically, if you are an ST12, you get this basic rate. If you're a 345, you get this basic rate, and if you're 678, you get this basic rate. Just of note, this has literally just gone up for ST6 pluses at this October 21 uplift. So you should see an increase in your pay slip from this month as opposed to last month. It's gone up by £3,000 per year. Just for fun, it's always nice to know what your hourly wage is to compare to other people, which is this much, which is not a huge amount, but hey, it's fun to know where you stand. For ST6 to 8, because this has just gone up, it's now gone up to £27 an hour. So yay. So that's previous stuff. This is for if you worked 40 hours a week, no more, no less, all in hours. And then it's less, if you're less than full time, it's pro rata. If you work anything above 40 hours a week, it's paid at exactly the same hourly rate. And it's calculated basically however many hours per week extra you work. So the quickest way to work it out is look at your basic pay. This is the ST1 to 2 basic rate. Then you calculate how many hours on average per week above 40 you're working. So for a 45-hour a week rota, it's an extra 5 hours a week, and then you divide it by 40. And then you get that chunk per year as your additional rate. Obviously, if you want to check on your pay slip, just divide it by 12 to work out what should be coming up so you can make sure that that's being paid correctly. And just if you're less than full-time, by definition, no less than full-time trainees should be on a rota that is more than 40 hours a week. So this stuff is not relevant. Ways that it can go wrong, common ways, are shift hours on your work schedule not matching the reality of what you're actually doing. This usually affects timings around handover. So I'm sure we've all had jobs where the work schedule says, oh, your shift starts at 8:30, but actually handover's at 8 or 8:15 and you were expected to be there. Or sometimes just the payroll team have got it wrong and they've inputted the hours incorrectly. Just to think about how that would work in reality, if you work an extra 15 minutes a day, that equates to an extra hour per week on average, and that works out to a 40th of your total annual salary, which is a lot. It's about £1,000 to £1,500. So even a 15-minute extra, all handover just starts a bit early, but we're all expected to be there, does have significant implications on your pay. So weekend allowance, okay. This is where stuff gets really messy. So if you want to make sure you're being paid correctly, particularly if you're less than full-time, this is the time to really really pay attention because it gets confusing. So if you're full-time, weekend frequency is pretty simple. You look at your generic work schedule, you look at your weekend frequency, and then you compare it to this wonderful table. But it's basically a percentage uplift of your basic pay. So for example, the ST678, now their basic pay has just gone up. This percentage uplift will also go up. Most pediatric rotas are in this 1 in 2 to 1 in 3 or 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 bracket. So most of us will be getting a 10 or 7.5% uplift on your basic pay. This bit is easy. Where it gets complicated is if you're less than full-time, and this is where things go really quite seriously wrong. I did a little survey about a year ago of South London hospitals and found that most hospitals are calculating this wrong. And in the hospitals where they're calculating it wrong, most trainees are being significantly underpaid. And in one hospital, we managed to claw back a load of money and actually found out that that problem, even though they said they'd fix it, is still ongoing and people are still being underpaid, even though they promised it was fixed. So this is happening all over London. Right, how can you find out what's going on? The weekend frequency for less than full-time is paid as a pro rata proportion of what the full-time weekend frequency would be. So if you work 50% of the weekends of your full-time colleagues, you get 50% of their uplift. What it's not is based on your percentage uplift value in that table. So let's say you work a 1 in 8 weekend frequency, that's irrelevant. You just get the pro rata proportion of the full-timers, not your 1 in 8 based on this table. So just how to calculate that. First of all, look at what the full-time weekend frequency is. That's usually a 1 in 3 or a 1 in 4 for full-time rotas at the moment. Count up, check what the percentage uplift is, and then multiply it by your weekend frequency over the full-time weekend frequency. So like 1 in 5 over 1 in 3, for example. I'll go through a worked example in a bit. Just a point of clarification again, a worked weekend is one that is where you start a shift on a Saturday or a Sunday. It doesn't include Friday nights at the moment. We're looking to get that changed, but just to be aware. So this goes wrong, and as I say, I'll do a worked example in a second, all the time. So real world example from back last year, full-timer working 1 in 3. So the 10% uplift at that time would have been about £4,900. A trainee worked 6 weekends in the 25 weeks, which was a 1 in 4.17. So if you do the calculation, that works out as 70% of the full-time equivalents. So what they should be paid is the full-time percentage uplift multiplied by their proportion of the weekends, and you get this amount on your work schedule. And then you divide that by 12 to work out what your monthly salary should be on your payslip. What payroll had done is looked at the weekend frequency and been like, oh yeah, it's 1 to 4 to 1 to 5, and worked it out as a 6% uplift. And then that worked out as just under £3,000. So that would lead to an almost £600 underpayment per year, so 50 quid a month, which is bad, but it's not awful. What they then went on to do is multiply that percentage uplift by the proportion and pay that much. And that worked out as a £1,500 pay deficit per year, which suddenly is quite a lot more. And I've seen this value go up to £2,000, £2,500 per year, which over the course of your training really starts to add up. And just in case anyone missed it, this is how this mistake was noted. The reason being, and a really quick and easy way to check whether you're being paid correctly or not, ignoring all the calculation stuff, is if you look at your payslip, this weekend frequency little bit here should say what the full-time weekend frequency is. So check your personalized work schedule, because that's also going to say it, and check your payslips. This is an incorrect one. This is where someone has been paid incorrectly because the full-time weekend frequency was 1 in 3, and their work schedule said 1 to 1.5 to 4.5, 6% uplift, 6%. What it should look like is this: 10% uplift at 77%. This is the 77%. Okay, I'm aware I probably bored people to tears, but hopefully pointed out why it's so important. Does anyone have any questions about this?
So that should say the work schedule weekend frequency for a full-time person, and then does it say underneath somewhere that what your percentage is, or is it just like a calculation they do and then they get in the amount column they get the right number?
Yeah, exactly. So on your work schedule that you get at the start of the rota, it should but doesn't always say exactly like this one has done, 77% of the full-time amounts. If not, you'll just have to calculate it manually. On your payslip, it doesn't say what your actual frequency said, what your actual proportion is. It just says the frequency, and then you need to do the maths yourself if you want to check that this actual value is correct.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
Well,
Okay.
Can I ask another quick question? Sorry, going back to that last slide. You know, on the the standard hours bit on yours, I'm guessing it says 32.
Oh yeah.
Isn't it meant to be 40? Or
yeah, really good question, a really good spot. So it should be, but I was 80% when I had this. So my hours per week were actually 32 hours per week. So it would be 40 if you were.
Because I thought it would be 32 to 36, isn't it, for like 80%? Or is there a variation in that?
It's really variable, and it can actually be variable within the same job. So if you have two people who are both 80%, they might have quite varied standard hours or like average hours per week, which is why that personalized work schedule that you get, which is a breakdown of your specific work schedule, is so important. So yeah, I mean, for example, when I was working this job and was 32 hours a week, one of my colleagues might have been working 35 hours a week, and they would have been getting paid more than me, obviously. Now, I'm not going to talk about designing rotas too much detail here, but if you are less than full-time, you get a little bit of say over your rota. You can often kind of tweak it here and there, and there is a range. You should be roughly working, let's say 80%. You should be roughly working 80% of every shift type that you would be working if you were full-time. Within that, there's a lot of flexibility. So as long as you're roughly within that bracket, most places are pretty happy. And you can, if you don't want to do just as many nights, you can do fewer nights and more weekdays or long days, etc. As long as things roughly add up. There is no hard and fast rule. But certainly if you're less than full-time, this standard rate thing should say what your average weekly hours are. And if you're full-time or above, it will just say 40. Has that clarified that point? Cool, I'll assume yes. Any last questions about this bit? I've still got some other stuff about pay, don't worry.
What's the difference between worked earned and paid due columns, and why are they different numbers? Surely
really good question, and I did know the answer and I have just forgotten. Wait, that's going to really annoy me. I'm sorry, I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head. Proves that I'm not an expert in this, just an enthusiast. If anyone does know, please speak up and fill me in.
Can I just go back to the standard hours question?
Yep.
Please, Dom, thank you. So you said that people in the same job would have different standard hours. How does that work?
So two separate things. If you are full-time, you're obviously usually on a rolling rota, and those roles aren't always exactly the same. There's generally close enough so that you'll just paid the same. We've all had jobs where someone, you know, their buddy has more night shifts or more long days than them, but they're paid the same. It's not the most fair, and if you want, you can at that point, if you think you're being underpaid, you can request to have a personalized work schedule where they'll look at exactly what you're meant to be paid and you get paid correctly for that. But in general, people don't bother doing that. It's more specific if you are less than full-time. Because there's a lot of flexibility in how work schedules are designed, you can be 80% and work, or 60% or 50% and work within a kind of a bracket, depending on exactly how your shifts line up. And particularly at the moment, because there are so many less than full-time trainees, which is fantastic, it means that lots of people find themselves in those slot shares where you've got two 80% people, but working like 50% of the on-calls, whereas someone else might be 80% but in a slot share working 80% of the on-calls, and they will end up having a different average weekly hours allowance. Your work schedule should be something that you are happy with. So if you want to be 80% and actually they've designed a rota that's 83% of these standard hours, you can say I'd like to work fewer, or if you know 75, I want to work up to 80 and get it adjusted, and you'll get paid accordingly. But there's quite a lot of flexibility when you go less than full-time. I know that's not a slightly rambly answer. I hope it's cleared it up.
Thank you. So should HR provide us with a copy of the work schedule if we ask for it?
Yes. And everybody, regardless of whether you're less than full-time or full-time, should get a work schedule. If you're full-time, it's usually a generic work schedule, which has just got the like 6 weeks of rolling or however many. If you are a less than full-time trainee, it should be a work schedule that literally has every single week of your rotation mapped out. and that should have all of the calculations of how it's been used to pay, and it should have your average weekly hours, your average night hours, etc. And you should, usually that's designed with you, so you can, I've been in lots of places where they've said, here's your full-time slot, pick the shifts that you don't want to work. But if you just get given it and you're not happy with it, you can go back to them and make some adjustments.
And does that apply to people on the old contract as well? Do they have work schedules?
They do have work schedules. The way that pay is calculated is different, but you should still get a work schedule. So actually, it's a really good point of clarification. The whole new contract, old contract thing, which first of all is an irritating misnomer because the new contract is now half a decade old, but it's only for pay. Everybody who works as a junior doctor in the NHS is on the new contract for terms and conditions. So all of the rest breaks, all of the average weekly hours, etc., it's all the same for everybody. But some people are just paid differently. But yes, if you're on the old contract, you should also get one of those things.
Thank you.
No worries.
Tom, we've just got a few questions. I might just run through them if that's all right.
Of course.
So first one, where can I find info on this to send to HR to prove that I'm being underpaid?
Which bit? The best port of call is the contract. It's easy if you just look up junior doctor contract. There are loads of links all over Google, but I've also got a link at the end of this that you can steal. Just make sure that you're on the correct version. So we're currently on version 9 of the junior doctor contract. The BMA also has a bunch of really good resources. So for example, if you just Google, and again, there's a link at the end, but if you just Google BMA less than full-time pay calculator, you get a lovely little work example going through how all of the different bits should be calculated. I would warn you, it's a bit of a struggle going to HR and saying you're underpaid. If you want, I'm happy to kind of advocate on your behalf because I've got now a painful amount of experience with it. But in general, if you just write to them and say, I am being underpaid, please look into this specific thing, you have to poke them a bit, but they will eventually look into it. But yes, the BMA website's got some really good resources, but it's all laid out in the terms and conditions contract as well.
Thank you. Next one is, where have we gone? Apologies. If you've left a trust but realise that you were paid incorrectly, how quickly should they rectify this and pay you back?
Should and will are probably incredibly different answers. I don't think there is any specific guide on how long is appropriate for them to pay you back. Yeah, I don't have an answer. I know that it often takes upwards of about 6 months. Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's very slow. I think the best thing to do is, if they're being really slow about it, get the BMA involved. And as soon as you start copying in people from the BMA, things usually move a little bit quicker. But I don't think they have to pay you back within a set period of time. Sorry.
Next one is, if you find discrepancies in the amount you've paid, how far back can you claim?
There's no hard and fast rule about that. As far as I know, I've just claimed back for someone a couple of days ago from about 1.5 years ago, and they were very happy to look into that and sort that out. I think, quite frankly, there should be no limit as to how far back they can pay you. I know that if a trust found out that they had overpaid you, I mean, I'm sure there's some, I'm not a lawyer, I'm sure there's some legal precedent that after X number of years they can get away with it. But I know people who've been hunted down many, many years after the fact and had to pay up. So I think you've got a good claim to go back and say, I have been underpaid 5 years ago, please pay me now. But don't know, sorry, question for a lawyer.
Thanks, Dom. And then last one, do tax codes get automatically sorted out? My tax codes are always wrong, and they say it's based on estimated income and will be sorted after the tax year.
The short answer is yes, they will get sorted, but I'll talk about tax later.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dom. We're at the end.
I don't think I actually answered any of your questions, but yeah. Any other questions before we go on to... Actually, we'll keep moving on because we're still talking about pay. Okay.
Sorry, Dom. Quick question just about the weekends, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I think it's probably pretty self-explanatory, but if you're on a less than full-time rota and you split your weekends, presumably when you work it out, a weekend counts as working both the Saturday and the Sunday.
So first of all, if you're less than full-time, you split your weekends. Well done, you're smart. You get paid per weekend worked. So if you work 1 hour on a Saturday or you work 40 hours over the whole weekend, that counts as a weekend worked.
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
And literally work Saturday one weekend and Sunday another weekend. You work double the weekends and you get double the pay. So split your weekends.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I did because I'm a massive nerd. I did a little bit of maths, and if you're a registrar on that basic salary rate, for every weekend that you split, you get about 150 quid extra. So yeah, worth doing.
Dom, sorry, one more question. Also, I'd love to be on a rota with you. I'd feel like you'd advocate for all of us. We've got one from Hannah saying, should I get a work schedule for every rotation? Have been told to use the same schedule from the last 6 months, although I've moved from ST4 to ST5.
You should get one for every rotation. The only time where I think it's reasonable for them to not do that is if you are full-time and your work schedule literally hasn't changed at all. But even then, it would be worth asking to have one that is dated for that whole period, just so that you've got the backup in case there are any pay problems. Certainly, if you're moving trust, if you're less than full-time, when things get changed around, or if there's any changes whatsoever in that work schedule, you absolutely should be getting a new one.
Brilliant, thank you.
That's all right. Going to tentatively move on to the night duty stuff. So the night duty uplift is basically extra money, extra uplift on your hourly rate if you are working during the night. So it's any hours between 9 PM and 7 AM, or it's the whole shift if it starts between 8 and midnight and more than 8 hours. Or it's the whole shift if it ends between 12 and 4. So if you're any of those like gnarly A&E shifts that start at, I don't know, like 3 in the afternoon and finish at 1 in the morning, then you get paid the night duty for the whole thing. This is usually calculated pretty correctly by the software. I haven't seen it go wrong many times, but it's always worth checking that the number of night hours you work are correct, and it's pretty easy to calculate, I say it relatively. So if you just look at the number of night shift hours you're working using kind of this criteria over the whole rotation, multiply it by 0.37 of your basic hourly rate. And then that gets as a little additional night duty uplift. Just again, because it's fun to know how much we get paid extra to work a night, the 37% uplift roughly equates to this much depending on your grade. But the ST68 is now about £10 per hour. So every time you work a night shift and at 3 in the morning you're feeling exhausted, you're like, yes, but at least I'm earning an extra £7. Cool. Pay premia, if you know about these, that's great. Some people haven't heard of them, so it's worth just being aware of what they are because they often get missed off on your pay slips.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just about night shifts, but also all of the other things. It's in terms of, so this is all based on your work schedule, and
Yes.
so is your work schedule, how similar is your work schedule to your actual rota? And then, so is it, what are you doing the maths on? And like, so if you swap a weekend for a night, you're still doing it based on your original work schedule.
Yeah. So in terms of payment, your pay is done on your work schedule that you get at the start. So you need to make sure that the work schedule matches up with what you are expecting to work down the line. If there are any massive changes, so for example, if the trust comes to you and says, we're really sorry, we've been completely screwed over by the number of trainees, we're going to have to change everything, we're going to have to redo the rota, you must make sure that you get reissued with a new work schedule to make sure that you're paid correctly. The real problem where this gets difficulty is where trusts go, we're going to do a bespoke Christmas rota. And from the last time I did this teaching session, someone said that one trust just blanked out the entire Christmas period, Christmas rota. And had everyone down for no shifts, so no one got paid any shifts over Christmas. If you then so yeah, make sure that your work schedule is correct at the start, because that's what your pay is based off. And then if you go on to do swaps later on, that's kind of at your own discretion. So you wouldn't go back and reissue a work schedule just because you've done a swap. But if you have been asked by your trust to do a swap, which would mean that you should be paid more because you swapped, you know, a long day into a night shift, for example, you are totally within your rights and indeed should be asking for either time in lieu or extra payment, because you should be being paid for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. So yes, pay premium for all of us. So if we're in London, we get a pro rata £2,000 and a bit per year for, you know, to compensate for the ridiculous expense of living in London. Again, just divide that by 12 / multiply by your less than full-time frequency to see what that should be on your pay slip. It's usually done right, but just make sure that it does appear on your pay slip. Oh, it often doesn't appear on your work schedule, but does appear on your pay slips, just to be aware. There's a less than full-time pay premium. So if you're at less than full-time, you get £1,000, not pro rata. So a flat £1,000 flat rate if you are any proportion less than full-time. So if you are 20% less than full-time or 80% less than full-time, you get £1,000 flat, which equates to about 83 quid a month on your payslip. The reason for this is basically to account for the fact that you know, GMC fees and MDU fees and things like that are still full price mostly, even if you're less than full-time. So that's what that's for. Not really matters for us, but if you are a GP, if there are any GP trainees in the audience, when you are in placement, you get just under £9,000 per year, divided by 12 per month for when you are in GP placements. It's worth checking because I've seen a few times where people have been, to explain, this is because when you're on a rota, you are working out of hours, etc. So your pay is a lot higher because of all of the out of hours stuff. And it's to make sure that your pay just doesn't wildly oscillate between GP placement and rota placement, so it makes it consistent across the board. But just check, I've seen places where people have been paid while on a rotation, like on a PEDS job, the out of hours stuff plus the GP pay premium, and they're being massively overpaid, which is great until they come hunting you down 10 years later and say you owe us 20 grand. So just be careful because they can do that. And then if you have a higher degree, so not like a one-year diploma, but I think it has to be an MD, PhD or equivalent or higher, and you come back into training, you get £4,500 pro rata as well, just in case there are any PhD peeps out there. So some final tips for pay, and then we'll see if there are any more questions. Please, please, please check your generic work schedule. You should receive this 6 weeks before you start. And in fact, as of relatively recently, it is now contractual that you must get your rotation 6 weeks before you start. You can't do much about it if you don't, but you can exception report it when you get your exception reporting login. And I would advise you all, on behalf of every one of your colleagues, past, present, and future, if you don't get your work schedule 6 weeks before, please exception report it so we know where the shortcomings are. It's not standing up and being like, oh, you're treating me badly. It's just a way to recognize places that need to get it sorted. And if there are any people, kind of consultants who do rotas in the audience, it's not a dig at you at all. We know that it's so difficult to get all the information from Health Education England in time to make the rota, etc. But it's really hard to do anything about that system if we don't know that people aren't getting their rotas in advance. So please do flag it up. If you are less than full-time, please check your personalized work schedule to make sure it accurately matches what you will go on to work. And check your pay slips. Learn to look at the left-hand stuff, the stuff that is being calculated and given to you, not just your take-home pay. Take-home pay is an incredibly poor indicator of whether you're being paid correctly or not, for a variety of reasons, mainly income tax. And if your pay is wrong, it's probably wrong for everybody else. So please start talking about money more and making sure that we're all kind of in it together and standing up for each other. Okay, I'm aware that we had lots of questions, so there's still about 10 minutes worth of tax. I'm very happy to carry on, obviously, but I know people need to disappear. I can't actually see how many people are on the call, but do disappear off if you need to. But any questions before we start talking about the joy subject of tax? Okay, I will crack on. So income tax, this bit, by the way, will save you money. Unless you already kind of know all of the stuff about it, this bit will save you possibly thousands of pounds. So really boring basic stuff, I'm so sorry, but everyone gets given a personal allowance. This means that the first £12,500 that you earn, you will not be taxed income tax on it. After that, there's a basic rate of 20%. If you're above £50,000 a year, you pay 40% on that proportion, and none of us are over 150,000. The last thing that's important to know is there's a thing called a trading allowance if you're self-employed. If you do stuff on Etsy, or if you do any kind of like paid tutorial work or whatever, the first £1,000 you earn off that, you don't need to claim. It's just yours. You don't get taxed on it. As soon as you start earning over £1,000, you have to start paying income tax on the whole lot. So just be aware. So how much this income tax stuff really comes down to how much you can be bothered when it comes to your tax code, because as someone alluded to earlier, your tax code is wrong, and it definitely is wrong all the time. The reason for that is many. The most common is because we are given a tax code based on our expected income. Because we rotate every 6 months or every year, the way that trusts communicate with each other and with HMRC really screws things up. So HMRC doesn't always have the most up-to-date information, so it's constantly trying to adjust your tax code. And if any of you are like me, you'll find yourselves constantly flip-flopping back and forwards between being overpaying your tax and underpaying your tax. I can go more into why that is if people are interested, but it's ultimately, it will eventually work itself out. The way that it works, if you're just on pay as you earn and not doing a self-assessment, is you get issued a tax code that gets adjusted based on whether they think you've under or overpaid on the previous tax year, and that's why your tax code goes all over the place. At the end of the tax year, many months down the line, it will be looked at. All of the money that you got that year will be analysed, and if you over or underpaid, they will either give you a rebate or adjust your tax code so that they gradually reclaim that amount back. But it's all over the place. So for the previous tax year, within this course of a few months, I got issued a £1,500 tax rebate directly into my bank account, followed by a letter saying I had underpaid £800 worth of tax and they would be reclaiming it over the course of the coming year. So it's just a shambles. If you do care, you can contact HMRC directly. They're pretty good over the phone, actually. They're really nice, they're really switched on, and they will go through stuff then and there and they'll correct your tax code. But I guarantee it will be out of sync within a few months. Yeah. So I would say if you can't be bothered and you don't want to get an accountant, don't worry too much about your tax code. It will eventually sort itself out. However, income tax relief is the stuff that will save you a load of money. So we all get tax relief on our professional expenses. Everyone in the UK does. It's not just a doctor special thing, it's a thing for everybody. So these are kind of the rough average fees. They're slightly dependent on your grade, etc. But all of these kind of fees that we pay. Oh, just as a very, very quick note, if you are less than full-time, you can claim a partial discount on your RCPCH fee. Just make sure that you do it. So you can get tax relief on all of this stuff. That means that if you're above the 40% tax bracket, which most of us probably will be, you get 40% back on all of this cash. And that works out as about £500 to £1,000 of rebates in your pocket every year. And if you haven't done this already and you're sat there going, oh God, why? You can claim up to 4 years of expenses previous plus your current year. So it's still time. And if you haven't done it this ever and you reclaim the last like 4 years, that's like £4 grand just straight into your pocket. It is literally free money. So how it works, you just submit as much info as you can about all of the expenses that you have accrued for professional things over the last few years. You collect a massive juicy tax rebate, and then they will adjust your personal allowance, that £12,500 of tax-free money, to incorporate your estimated annual expenses. So let's say you have £2,000 of professional fees a year, they will just increase your tax-free allowance by £2,000. So you can get an extra £2,000 in your pocket before you start paying tax. Once it's done, you never need to go back to it again unless your annual expenses change significantly, which is very, very useful. So just do it once and it's done. So how you do it? First of all, set up a personal tax account, which is an incredibly useful thing to have. It's a little government portal thing that shows you all of the income you receive from all of your pay-as-you-earn jobs, and it is there retrospectively, so you can look at how much you got paid from like Lewisham Hospital 3 years ago. There is a link at the end as well, but it's really easy to find out just how to search for personal tax accounts. Once you've got a personal tax account, if you just Google tax relief for expenses of employment, and it takes you to a lovely form that takes about half an hour, 20 minutes to fill in if you've got all of the stuff at hand. So yeah, maybe just sit down with some Netflix and a glass of wine, and then once it's done, it's submitted and you get loads of money back a few weeks or a couple of months later. Last topic on national insurance tax. So first of all, who cares? And has anyone actually thought about national insurance tax? Probably not, and probably no one needs to care, but there is one specific situation where you really need to know about this stuff. So just a bit of background, up to a certain amount, so everyone gets a teeny little bit of tax-free where they don't pay national insurance. Then the first kind of these numbers per month, you pay 12% on it, on everything. And then after that, you only pay 2%, but it's obviously going up by 0.5%, so that's going to increase a little bit. So that is important because on most of your earnings, you're paying, well, on the upper end of your earnings, you're paying 2%, not 12%. This is super important if you locum in other hospitals or you have other jobs. And if you're doing this, you could be losing out on literally hundreds of pounds. So the reason is hospitals and different jobs don't talk to each other. So let's say you're earning more than enough to hit this 2% little tax bracket. So everything that you're above that, you should be paying 2% on. And then you go to some elsewhere and you do a few days of locuming. They don't know that you're at this 2% threshold, so they will charge you 12% on the first £4,000 a month that you earn. So that's an extra 10% of money that you're just giving away for free. This works out as roughly up to £75 a week in over-taxation if you're earning more than £1,000. So it does add up if you're doing this a lot. Unlike income tax, this will literally never correct itself. This money is just gone forever and no one will look into it. But there is an incredibly thrillingly named form called the CA72A form that you can fill in that will just automatically fix this for you. And what it does is it notifies the powers of HMRC, or actually it's a different body, but whatever. It notifies them that you have multiple jobs and you say, this is my main employer, please charge me as normal here. All of these are extra employers, please just charge me 2%, and then someone will go back after the tax year, look through all of your earnings and see whether you were paid correctly or not. But worth doing if this applies to you. Again, there's a link at the end. So that is everything, me monologuing about tax. Please feel free to email me if you've got any specific questions, if you've got any problems with your trust, you're not being paid or looked after correctly. And I think this is going to be on YouTube, but if you want to take a picture of this, which is just a bunch of useful links, all of the ones that are horrible, massive URLs, I've just tiny URLs to make it a little bit easier. Take a picture now, and then I will stop the slide sharing so I can see people. And then if anyone's got any questions, I'll stick around for a bit. Thank you.